Opposed? Consent agenda is adopted. So at this time, we'll move into audience comments. Looks like we have all staff out there tonight. If you're on Zoom, you can use the raise your hand function. Looks like staff and consultants there. So at this time, we will go into the general manager's report. George.
All right, thank you, commissioners. Good afternoon, everyone. Got a brief update, just a recap of some things going on. Just open up with the budget work sessions and the budget process that we're working on. So earlier today, we had our second work session for the 2024 budget. And after that, now we've gone through the kind of expenses and capital projects for all of the departments. And so unless the commissioners request additional information or want to do another work session, the next step in the process is to bring the budget back to the board at the first meeting in November for adoption. So like we said earlier, if you have any concerns, questions, just you can voice them, you can email us or anything like that. But is there any interest in having anything on the 31st? No, their work sessions? Okay.
We're good.
All right. Tomorrow morning we have an all staff meeting here at 7:30. So we usually try and do those quarterly. And this is good timing before we get to training day at the end of the year. So I'm going to provide an update on a variety of projects. I'll give a summary of the 2024 budget to staff as well, because obviously not all of them make it out to the work sessions. And then Alistair and Ben are also going to be doing some cybersecurity training for staff as well. Lots of construction going on in the field behind us. The building's going up, the forms are going up for the walls. So if you get a chance, you can see every week it changes. They're starting to go up now, which is interesting. Let's see, something that I need to do at every meeting because of our emergency declaration. Talk about the transformer at the SRD. So we did sign last week an additional contract with the same consultant that's been working with us, KVA. We talked about this briefly at the last meeting. We've asked them to do some work for us so we can proactively keep our transformer lasting longer than the last one did. So what they're doing is installing some equipment to protect our transformer from power surges and loss of phase protection from the PSE system. So the last setup that we had didn't have that separation. And so they are going to purchase and install some equipment on our behalf and install it so that if there's an issue with PSE, our breaker will drop, circuit will cut out, and then we'll be protected from any surges. And even when PSE starts up, it's not just going to start up automatically. We will then have to go into our system and go and reset it if we're okay with how everything's going. So that's one layer of protection. And then when the power shuts off, right now we have our communication system running through the power at the SRD. So we have to install a battery backup system for our communications in there too, and they're going to do that.
Power outages are probably pretty common up there too.
Mike knows more, yeah, but it's what, 5 or 6 times in the last 10 years we've had issues.
Well, 12 times since 2015.
No, 12 times since 2015.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going in and out, that's just doing damage to the transformer that was there, and we didn't have that separation. So we're going to put that in now. So now the total cost to date, if you add that to what we already paid to get the transformer up and in running, the total cost to date are now $844,828.90. We anticipate this to be the last piece of work to get this all done. And so once that work is completed, I'll recommend that we cancel the emergency declaration.
Yep.
There is, just lastly, there's a item in the information section for an SP&P. So again, those are safety practice and procedures that don't go to the board for formal adoption or approval, but they're there for your review and comment. So if you have any questions when it gets to commissioner comments or anything like that, Jay's here, so feel free to ask if you have any questions. And that's all that I got.
All right, so at this time, we are going to moving on to resolution 2300-23, approving the transfer of ownership of the Fidalgo Island Water System to the city of Anacortes and including the amendments thereto.
So in the packet is a resolution, making this a formal adoption. Also in there is the amendment that we did to the original agreement. So the original agreement was signed in 21. This is an amendment to address the issues that we still have to take care of. And we've got a timeline in place and kind of a scope, and we're already starting to pursue those changes. So Bill and Mark did a good job on laying out the chronology of the project in the memo, so I don't need to go back over that. But the plan, if the resolution is adopted tomorrow, I'm gonna do all the paperwork, sign everything over, and it should become formal tomorrow to transfer it. We've already taken our last meter reading. That was done on the 12th, I think. This will then transfer on the 25th, which is tomorrow, and then just a matter of finishing up the stuff that we have to do.
Have there been any calls from customers out there?
Not that I'm aware of. Bill shaking his head, so
We've been working with the Anacortes staff. There's been a few things that have come up on new water services and just timing and transfer. So we'll look through all those.
in the last, like, since we took the last meter reading, we've still been like the point of contact. And so if things were to happen, we would obviously still address them. And so, yeah, things like that have come up. We'll still get questions and calls, I think, going forward, probably for a little while longer, while people get used to the change. But Anacortes has sent their communication out to all the customers, and, they've got to set up new accounts, and I think they've been clear. We've been clear in our communication. So should go smooth. We completed all of our capital projects like we said we were going to do. Got a little bit to clean up with the easements. But the original schedule that Bill set out at the beginning of the year was to try and get this transferred in October, and we've hit all that. So that, I think it's been a great job from everybody's perspective as far as hitting it for timing. So it's gone really well. And we're ready, and they're ready to accept the new system. So.
Well, let's hurry up and do it before they change their mind.
Yeah, we've thought about that too. Yeah,
good.
Just kidding.
No, these are complex, and good job to everyone involved.
I agree with that. I'm going to be recusing myself from this decision.
Okay, so I would entertain resolution 2300-23.
I move that we approve the resolution 2323, approving the transfer of ownership of the Fidalgo Island water system to the city of Anacortes, and authorize the general manager to sign First Amendment to the Fidalgo Island water system and asset transfer and improvement agreement.
All right, we have a motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And abstaining.
Aye.
There we go. All right, so that is adopted. And Kevin, are you introducing it, or George, are you introducing
I can introduce the subject. So we did another customer satisfaction survey recently. The last one we did was in 2019, and the intent was to do it every 2 to 3 years. Obviously the pandemic started in 2020. We didn't think it was a good thing to do it while that was going on, so we pushed this out a couple of years, but we did have budget for it, so we hired the same company. We asked basically the same questions, and now this provides us 2 data points to track progress and information with our customers. This was all, I won't get into all the details. I'm sure DHM will do that, but we have the results. And we thought it would be good to share those with the board, and then ask questions as they come up. So I'll turn it over to, looks like Tony from DHM.
Hi there. Can you all see me?
Just trying to work on the volume.
Okay. Just checking if you can hear me.
Is there a way to get that louder, Nick? Oh, you want to try again, Tony?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I think that's doable.
Okay. Okay. And you can all see the slide deck there in front of you, title page.
Yes. Yep, we
Okay.
can.
Terrific. Thank you. So, thank you for the opportunity to present our findings. My name is Tony Iaccarino. I'm a research manager with DHM Research. I'm joined by David Fan, research associate also at DHM, who will be presenting the second half of the presentation. We're both with DHM Research. DHM Research is a public opinion research firm that's been working in the Pacific Northwest for 40 plus years. We're based in Portland, Oregon, but we have an office in Seattle, Washington. We like to say our job is to talk to people about the communities they want to live in. And that includes the kind of education system and transportation system and parks and other kinds of services they'd like. And then to share that information that we find with decision makers so they can make more informed decisions to satisfy the needs of the people that they represent. So with that in mind, let's jump into the survey results. Well, first, just to talk a little bit about the purpose of the research. The goal was to assess customer satisfaction with Skagit's drinking water services. We had a few other goals that we won't go in detail into for this presentation, but it's part of the full report, given that today's presentation is more abridged and abbreviated. Another goal was to gauge awareness of conservation programs and identify approaches to promote conservation, identify your customers' communication preferences and their billing preferences. And then, as mentioned earlier, to compare these results with the 2019 survey findings so you can measure and track changes over time. Like last time, we conducted a hybrid or mixed mode survey of 400 Skagit residential customers. Hybrid means in this case, means half of the people that we communicated with were contacted by a live interviewer by phone, and the other half received a text message inviting them to participate in a survey online. We do this for a number of reasons. Fewer and fewer people have landlines, and fewer people are answering their phones. So we use a mix of methods to reach people where they are. The survey was conducted in late September. We set quotas by age and gender to make sure we had a representative sample, at least in those areas. And the study has a margin of error of plus or minus 4.9%. I do want to talk about that just for a minute because it's important for helping us understand the findings that you'll be seeing first. So first of all, margin of error plus or minus roughly 5%. What does that mean? It essentially means that if you see 75% yes in the upcoming survey findings, if you had the luxury of contacting all of your customers and asking them a similar question, you can be very confident that the results would be somewhere between 5% above 75% or about 5% below 75%. This is really important for benchmark surveys because if the results in 2019 and 2023 are within about 5 percentage points, then it's not really that statistically significant. But if we're noticing a difference in percentage, which is less than 5%, but all of those differences tend to be positive, or all of those differences tend to be negative, then you can be pretty confident that there's some sort of directional change, and there is some significance to those overall numbers. So I hope that makes sense. And if anybody has any questions as we move forward, please feel free to interrupt and ask. We'll also answer questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so first, just a snapshot of who we reached out to. This gives you a sense of who we spoke with, fairly representative of your customers, and very similar profile to the customers that we contacted in 2019.
Tony, before you move on, can you make the presentation bigger? It's currently in the presenter view.
Oh, yes. So sorry about that. Okay. Apologies. How's that?
That was good.
Much better.
Okay. Really sorry about that. I didn't realize that. Okay. So one of the first things we do, hold on a second. I'm not seeing a donut in the middle of this slide for some reason. I'm going to describe the visual here. I don't think this is going to happen in other slides. I'm not sure why this is occurring, but one of the first things we ask is about awareness. Who is it that provides drinking water services? In 2019, 89% named Skagit PUD as their water service provider. In 2023, that figure was 81%. So an 8% drop, or an 8% difference, which does seem significant, something to keep in mind. We then asked your customers whether they're satisfied with their overall drinking water services. And as you can see, 92% of customers remain highly satisfied with their overall service. Now that's compared to 95% overall satisfaction in 2019. A bit of a drop of 3% satisfaction. That's within the margin of error of plus or minus 5%. So not anything really to be concerned about. But we did want to provide a little context for you. The decrease in overall satisfaction with Skagit PUD, that 3% drop, does seem to be consistent with what we're finding in the other utility surveys that we've conducted in the region, for which we have benchmark data. This first percentage of 95% represents the average overall customer satisfaction with their utilities in those years immediately prior to the pandemic. That 90% figure is the average overall satisfaction with utilities, the 5 or 6 utilities that we've conducted benchmark surveys for during these years. And you can see a kind of a 5% drop. Now, we think the primary reason for this is people's concerns about utility rates and costs and price seem to be growing across all of the surveys we've done. And that's consistent with what we know in our more general opinion surveys, which is people are very, very concerned about the housing affordability and cost of living. So we think what's happening here is the specific concern with cost is driving down overall satisfaction for utilities across the region. Now, putting that larger context aside for a moment, when we ask an open-ended question, why are you satisfied, very satisfied, or somewhat satisfied with the service you receive from Skagit? You can see, and these are consistent with what we found in 2019, that the most mentioned reasons, and we've coded the reasons into categories here, have to do with quality of water, reliability of service, and also this 19% of, hey, I'm just not noticing any issues. I've got no problems. So again, good quality water, reliable service. These are the key reasons people are overall satisfied with Skagit PUD. Now we ask a similar question to that small minority of customers who are dissatisfied with their service. And we see that the most often mentioned reasons are cost, some concerns about taste or water quality. The big caveat here I want to point out is the sample size here is 23 customers. So what we're talking about here when you see this 35% figure or that 27% figure, this is 35%, 27%, 21% of 6% of your customers who are dissatisfied. So wouldn't be too concerned about this, except to say that among those who are dissatisfied, albeit the minority, concerns about cost are the biggest concern. We also ask a question, how would you rate the quality of drinking water that you receive at home? So this is less about, drinking water services in general, but more about the quality of the actual product, the drinking water. Customers, 91%, are overwhelmingly positive about the quality of their drinking water, and those rates are high and comparable to 2019 where you had very similar results, 92%, 92% positive ratings. Now, before David goes into some of the more specific customer service areas where we ask about satisfaction, one of the things I think you'll notice in the upcoming slides, and I've touched upon this before, is that if you're noticing dissatisfaction, it's really primarily around rates. And when you ask people, how satisfied are you when it comes to Skagit's ability to keep rates affordable, we do see some high negatives there. And it's really the only place we see high negatives. But I want to also point out that when you ask customers not just about price in general, but the value they get for the price, you see high rates of satisfaction, 85% in 2019 and holding steady at 84% in 2023. And so that, I think, is it's an important thing to keep in mind. Okay, I'm going to let David now move on to some more specific aspects of Skagit's, about the services that Skagit provides.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So now move on to the next section, perceptions of key services. So we've seen customers' overall perceptions of Skagit PUD, and now I'll take a look at a deeper look into some individual aspects of service to give some more nuance as it pertains to customer satisfaction. So here we have a battery of items that we ask customers to rate based on how they think Skagit PUD performs in each area, with the options ranging from very good to very poor. And all of these were also in the last survey, so we're able to make some direct comparisons. And looking at this slide, things we can pull out here is that all of these are rated quite positively overall. And looking at these top three over here in particular, which we subjectively group together as Skagit's core services, which include providing a reliable source of water, providing water that is safe to drink, and providing water that tastes good. These are rated exceptionally high and are certainly the top performing areas for customers. And evidently so, as these were also the top areas in the 2019 survey. And looking at these darker teal bars, these show those that rated these as very good, and the lighter teal indicates those who said good. So the strength of positivity for these top three areas is also substantially higher than the ones below them. Other things we see here are that customers are more likely to say they don't know about these services than to say that Skagit PUD has done a not so good job. As we can see, these gray bars that signify don't know percent are much larger than the orange ones that indicate those who rated these as poor, with the exception of keeping rates affordable. And this is not surprising given the earlier context of what we've seen across other utilities research we've done. People are feeling the brunt of inflation and other impacts as it pertains to financial worries across communities. So rate affordability is more likely to be met with negative ratings, but this is definitely not unique to Skagit PUD. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here we want to give a sense of change over time for these services. The three core services, reliability, safe to drink water, and water that tastes good, have held these high ratings compared to 2019. And these ratings have dropped by a few percentage points, but overall we wanted to highlight that Skagit PUD continues to excel in these areas. Next slide, please. And then we have these areas that kind of sit in this middle tier where they're not rated quite as high as the core services, but they are still rated highly positively overall. So when it comes to promoting water conservation, keeping customers informed, providing responsive customer service, and keeping rates affordable, we see a kind of similar story here where these services have experienced a slight dip from 2019, with the biggest drop being 6% for water conservation. And just for a little bit of context, lower awareness of conservation programs and tools is an observation that we did make in the full report. Next slide, please. And in this group of services, transparency and openness, environmental sustainability efforts, watershed protection, and future planning, we see relatively lower satisfaction ratings with these compared to the previous ones we looked over. But we want to highlight again that these lower positive numbers are driven by really a lack of awareness or a higher amount of customers who say they don't know or don't have an opinion about these, versus a high amount of those who think the service they receive is poor. And again, when comparing to 2019, we see the same thing with a decline in positive ratings for each of these. Next slide, please. So still looking at those 4 services from the previous slide, we wanted to see who are more likely to be unaware of these aspects of service. And in this case, we did find differences across age groups and gender, where younger customers age 18 to 44 and women are more likely to say they don't know about these services or aspects of services. And the numbers that are shaded in this gray color are just to signify that these are statistically significant differences within these groups. Next slide, please. And so just to zoom back out, overall numbers are slightly lower across the board from the last time the survey was conducted, but still majority of respondents rate each of these as good or very good. And again, just to reference that this is something we've seen from recent similar surveys. So definitely take it as a positive sign that these numbers are as high as they are, considering that 2019 was a very different point in time. And I'm gonna turn it back to Tony just to go over our last slide here.
Yeah, and just to echo what David said and what I mentioned before, some of these differences between 2019 and 2023 are within that margin of error of plus or minus 5%. But given the fact that all of them are consistently lower, that suggests some sort of a real directional change when it comes to overall perceptions. So that's a negative in the sense that we're seeing this kind of negative trend. On the other hand, remember to put this into context with other utilities, at least the utilities for which we've done research for in the Pacific Northwest. And this is a trend that we're seeing that is not in any way unique to Skagit. The report has some additional recommendations and a lot more details and exploration of demographic differences. But, we just want to leave you with 3 things to think about, humbly submitted as possible next steps. Your first is just keep up the good work. Keep providing those high quality core services. Your customers are very satisfied when it comes to overall service, when it comes to the quality of their drinking water, and when it comes to the reliability of their water service. In those core areas, satisfaction is high, and overall satisfaction is very high. Second thing I think to think about, because there are other areas where satisfaction is not as high, openness and transparency, providing environmentally sustainable services, protecting watersheds and stream flow, future planning. Again, slightly lower satisfaction than in those core services. But in these areas, David and I want to reiterate, lower satisfaction in these areas has less to do with negative ratings and more to do with just lower rates of awareness, higher don't knows. So anytime you've got high don't knows, you have a communications opportunity. So anything you can do to raise awareness about what you're doing in these areas are likely to net you positive, higher positive rates of satisfaction, because on the whole, people are satisfied with what you're doing here. And finally, do address or do what you can to address that one area where you do see high negatives. And that has to do with the affordable rates. This is an area where you've got higher negatives and where your negative rates are growing. As you know, there are a number of ways that utilities have tried to address this. Various billing or payment assistance programs and offerings, obviously something to consider. But also, there's a communications opportunity here. Remember that when you ask about costs in the abstract, people are concerned, and no one likes to pay anything really when it comes to the services they get. If they could get it for free, they'd prefer to get it for free. But whenever you can emphasize the value that customers are getting, when you have to make difficult communications about rate increases or things like that, again, the more you emphasize the value, the more you can help mitigate those concerns. And so that's all we've got for you. But David and I are happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Questions?
I think just a comment. I think it's great. I mean, as you said, the I don't know is just as important as the satisfied and dissatisfied as far as information for directionality to go for communication. So it's all great information and very helpful for moving forward.
Were text messages used in the 2019 survey?
Yes, they were. We used the same approach.
Okay.
And this is not in the presentation, but it's interesting you bring up texts. One very noticeable difference in the findings between 2019 and 2023 is that when it comes to emergency communications, there is a skyrocketing and growing preference for text communication as a primary way for Skagit to communicate with its customers, again, in urgent or emergency situations. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's in the full report.
All right. Well, thank you both for being on here tonight.
You're welcome.
I want to just talk about his last slide, because Kevin brought this up a little bit during the work session. There are some communication opportunities, as Tony put it. And so, Kevin talked about there's a lot of things we can do. Most of them are included in his community relations budget. And there's things that we can talk about, whether we want to do them, whether we see there's value in them. This information helps at least kind of steer the conversation a little bit. There were no significant changes or strategies that, Kevin put into his budget for next year, but there's things we can change if we think it's valuable. So, I'd ask you to maybe look at this, think about it, consider it. There's some things that don't take a lot of effort, and there's some things that take a lot. And so we have to see what the benefit of those are. But yeah, there are opportunities if we choose to go down that road. The first recommendation we will always do, right? Continue to provide the good water quality services that we do. It's the second and third part, which, yeah, we have an opportunity to do more if we choose to do so. So something to think about.
For sure.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Thanks, David.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next up, we have informational items 9 through 11 there. There's the SP&P 3016. Judy Reservoir report, monthly status, which we went through earlier today. Any commissioner comments?
Okay.
Okay, I have none. So with that, we will adjourn at 5:10 p.m.